do you see yourself in the mix of local developers? What do you think some of the long-term impacts of this downturn will be? Where do you get the vision that ends up turning into a reality, or do you just have a sense that this could be something? This is a series providing insight into Maine's real estate movers and shakers. And speaking of movers and shakers, I'm delighted to be joined by Josh Benthien today. Josh is the CEO and partner of Northland Enterprises. Based in Portland, Maine, Northland specializes in commercial real estate development, including new construction, historic renovations, and build-to-suit projects customized to the needs of local businesses. Northland has been developing and managing commercial real estate throughout Maine, upstate New York, and Vermont since 2001. Northland Management Corp. Was founded in 2012 to support the company's growing rental portfolio. Thank you for joining us, Josh.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So you grew up in a small town in New Hampshire.
I did. I grew up in Goffstown, so right outside of Manchester. When I was young, saw the mills, as vacant buildings, and kind of got to see Manchester, its rebirth through my adolescence, which was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Transferred over to some of the mill work we've done here.
Then you went to Colgate University?
I did. I studied philosophy at Colgate.
Yeah.
Left Colgate not knowing what I wanted to do. Had no idea, didn't really think about a career as I studied philosophy, and just tried to interview with any company in the New York area. So in the New York City area, my friends were all going to New York City. I just this sounds fun. I'll go work there. So that's what my next stop was, New York City.
So fresh BA in hand, your main goal was get me to New York City.
Yep.
And you landed in Manhattan.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I did a reverse commute for about a year and a half to a company in Long Island. Never have. I think I've been to Manhattan once, and so I looked on a map. I'm like, that's like 20, 30 miles, and it shouldn't be too bad. It ended up being a 2-hour each way commute. Did market research, so we studied consumer packaged goods surveys. So a lot of the polling issues that are coming up with political polling right now, I'm kind of familiar from back when you're trying to make sure that consumer packaged goods polls or surveys, that data is correct. And so I kind of worked in that world for a little bit. When I left the office, I didn't think about it until the morning when I came in, the next morning, and I that wasn't what drove me. So I decided I needed to find something different to do.
So you didn't have a passion in surveying for consumer?
How I landed at philosophy is kind of how I landed in real estate. I took a lot of different classes, and I was like, I had a hard time working as hard as I thought I should work if I didn't really have a passion for something. And I took a philosophy class. I'm like, this is really cool. This is interesting. I like to write and think, and and so that worked. But if I had tried to force myself to do econ, it probably wouldn't have.
Right.
And so I think the same thing with market research. It was interesting, but I wasn't passionate about it.
Yeah.
So
So
I got introduced to someone in the real estate industry, and he was through a family friend. I just cold called him up. He Joe Simone was his name, and he runs a boutique brokerage firm, so commercial brokerage. And I just asked him if I could come in and pick his brain, because I had no idea what I could do with a philosophy degree. It wasn't clear to me, and just wanted to talk to him. Not thinking I would get a job in real estate, but we talked for several hours one night, and the discussion kind of turned to cars, and he just kept probing me on questions about cars, and I have a passion for cars. So, at some point he said, if you can, if you have this passion for cars and you can talk about cars like this, I can teach you to talk about and understand and sell and lease buildings. I think you could be good at this. And well, that's flattering. So I basically went on as like a salesperson intern, and worked there, and I loved it. That was awesome.
Yeah, pretty cool job to have in New York at the time, for sure.
Yeah.
So eventually you landed back up north.
Yeah. So I loved working in New York. I didn't love living in New York. I being from New Hampshire, I kind of always wanted to have, kind of the life that Maine and New Hampshire can provide for you. My wife, Kate, she was from Brooklyn, so we were together in New York. And I had an opportunity through Bobby Monks and Tim O'Neill. They had a firm that was based in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So They hired me to be director of acquisitions, and this was kind of an industrial acquisition fund. Kate stayed in New York, and I moved to Portsmouth. Really operated the whole Northeast and did a lot of cold calling, visiting, meeting with brokers in Lehigh Valley and northern New Jersey and Connecticut, and trying to find deals that aren't on the market. We were in that market right as some of the lower return money started hitting the secondary and tertiary markets. So pension funds were going into those markets, and we just weren't able to compete on a price.
Yeah, they crowded the space quite a bit.
Yeah. So it didn't ultimately work out, but I was able. Bobby and Tim were willing to bring me up and to Portland and try to find a place for me here.
Yeah,
So,
that's great. So you landed at Eagle Point, which is probably their sort of flagship company.
Yeah, it's an amazing company,
Yeah.
and so it's an affordable housing developer. They operate throughout the country, and similar role there, director of acquisitions. They were kind of in starting this, not a business line, but it was a new kind of endeavor where they were buying general partnerships in existing tax credit deals that are kind of a legacy deal. So 11, 12 years into a deal, they would buy the general partner out, and no one was really doing that, and so they were on the forefront of that, and so it was an interesting kind of an assignment to try to reach out to those type of investors and say, would you be interested in selling your interest? But I thought it was very. I have a ton of respect for what they do and how they're brilliant, and it's a very complex financial structure and type of real estate. I didn't quite have the passion for that I was trying to search. I knew it wasn't like everything wasn't aligned. So
right. So you got a little more localized, and you joined Northland, which Rex Bell, who's now your partner, had founded a few years before you joined, right?
Yeah. So Rex and Bobby had started Northland in 2001. I joined. So right in the 2008 crash, Eagle Point kind of hit the brakes on some of these acquisitions that they were pursuing. Wanted to steady the ship and said that you're probably not going to be doing any acquisitions, so we're going to let you go, which I think was, in retrospect, a good thing for me. I was able to kind of connect with Rex. Rex and I had been working on the Baxter Library project. So while at Eagle Point, the partner I worked directly under there, Todd Alexander, he and I had kind of reached out to Mecca, got the Baxter Library under contract, and then handed that off to Rex as kind of an affiliated company to run with it as we were, looking nationally for the stuff we looked for. So Rex was, reaches out, and I'm sitting at Starbucks the day after getting laid off, and Kate had she had moved up in May, and this was September. She had just gotten a job at Allagash the week before, so she spent the whole summer trying to find a job. Finally gets one, and I remember, calling her. I'm like, hey, guess what? I just got laid off. So I was just trying to put my, kind of put the broker hat on of who am I going to call? What am I, what's my list, my action list? I was sitting at Starbucks on Forest Ave and outside, and Rex called me. And so we started talking, and we talked for, I would think, like a month, about financial structure, but that was really a small part of it. It was more about culture. Experience, life experience, what I liked, what he liked, what we wanted to get out of real estate and work, and long-term goals. And so I think there was a long courtship process before we decided we were the right, it was right for us to team up. And
Sure.
It's pretty awesome.
So tell me a little bit about your team at Northland.
So we're I think a pretty small group. We call ourselves a team. Rex, as being a former Olympic ski jumping team coach, he really has instilled and helped kind of foster that feeling of we're a team. We all wear different hats. In some of my previous roles, I felt very, it was very siloed, and just because they were larger companies, right? So you would, go find the deal, and pass it off to the underwriter, and then these folks will close it, and then these folks will develop it. And one of the things that was key to me with Rex, and that he wanted me to do, it was just to do it from start to finish. And I'm there start to finish now, but we have people that are doing pieces of it, but then also they're seeing it from different angles. So if Brad, who does our development, is also helping with the early modeling now and helping the finance, so he's getting to do things that it's not his daily role, but I want everyone to understand what we all do, so that we're more helpful and compassionate to the other team member in terms of what we request of them and expect of them, so we understand their job. So it's not, we're not in our, with blinders on.
Sure.
It's an amazing staff. So Ellen Thompson's our CFO. She's a partner with Rex and I in the management company, as is Brad Fries, and he has a construction background. He was a PM and an estimator at Benchmark Construction, and then he does all the pre-construction. So he can do estimating alongside an estimator from a CM, and then kind of work with them to say, hey, how about we do this a little bit differently, or look at these subs. And then we have Mary and Lauren and Kayla and Tim and James. That's our crew, and with that we are able to do all the asset management, do all the the bookkeeping, the financing, and the management of all the properties. And with the pandemic stuff, it's really just amazing the attitude that everyone has had, and we were fully remote for several months, and Kayla had just started with us, and so we never even get to see her, and she was, we'd ask her to just, hey, can you work on this, can you do this, and it would just be done in an hour. I'm like, crap, I thought that was gonna take you a day, but everyone's just doing what they can, and I think it's more about trying to foster that attitude, and being good team members with each other. And I saw Admiral McCraven. There was a podcast I was listening to a couple weeks ago, and he was like, if you had a choice between attitude and ability, you hire for attitude. Every time.
Yep.
And we've made the mistake where we didn't do that, and we can teach skills, but you can't teach that.
You've referred to the Baxter Library a couple of times.
Yeah.
So just for people who aren't familiar with that project, tell us a little bit about what that was.
Yeah, so that was our first project together. It was the original library for the city of Portland. Francis Fassett, the architect, had designed it, and it's next to the State Theater building. If you look at it, it looks like a church. It's the Romanesque revival style. It's just an amazing building, and it's one of the projects it's the first one. It was so hard because it was in the 2008, 2009, 2010, it was kind of took a long time to put together, and it was in a time when banks weren't super excited to take big runs, to see something that didn't actually make sense and say, yeah, we believe in this. And you had Northland Rex, who was established but didn't really do this type of real estate because it wasn't housing, it was a commercial, so it was new for Northland. I was unproven, but we both had the passion that we thought we could get this done, and we loved the building. And we found Via, and John Coleman, who ran Via, he shared that. And so it became, instead of trying to make a building work for an unknown tenant, it was to try to make that building work for Via, to help them grow, and have a long-term home on that part of Congress Street, which at the time there wasn't a ton of activity there, right?
Yeah.
So, looking now at what that block is and what it was 12 years ago is really rewarding. Via bought the building from us a couple of years back, which is awesome. So they're going to be there forever.
Yeah. So it's a beautiful building, and the renovation inside is amazing. I can see where it's a good employee retention and attraction tool for them too. It's got to be great for recruiting.
I think it is.
Who wouldn't want to work there?
It's just if you haven't seen it, it's just an amazing. It's just a cool place to be.
Where do you see yourself in the mix of local developers? What do you think Northland's sort of specialty or? It's
funny because I still feel like I'm just starting out, and so I look up to a lot of these other developers. I'm like, oh wow, just look at everything they've done, and so I feel like I'm. I'm way down
Still
here.
the new kid on the block.
But I think what we're best at. I think we're really good at problem solving and figuring out creative ways to, given the right amount of time. And so, projects that are fast tracked and, don't allow flexibility and creative problem solving, that's probably not the ones that we're going to go after. But we like to work with sellers, and I particularly, I find it really rewarding to work with tenants. So I think Northland's kind of shifted since I've joined, and it's really kind of been like a build to suit, renovate to suit developer. 90% of what we do is we meet with a tenant who needs something, and whether that's I want to be in this building, but I want it renovated in, like a VIA or Harvey Performance, and they want a new building. I think we're really good at helping tenants navigate that, build something, plan for expansion, plan for the future. And then generally we hold on to things for a long time. And, it's kind of, we look at this as a long-term partnership with our tenants. We want the operating costs to be low. We want them to grow. We want to see their success.
Yeah.
And so
translates to yours.
Yeah.
And so that reminds me of the Gorham property you said you built for Harvey. That was a 12-month build?
I think it was 11.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
80,000 square feet.
Yeah.
29,000 of that's office. And it was, we started August 7th and we got CO at July 1st. And
so
Landry
8
French.
months in, you had a little thing called COVID.
Yeah.
Try to throw a wrench in the works, and you guys still managed it.
Yeah, that was just, I've said that, it's so cliche, but it really was like a dream development team. Harvey is a very diligent and involved tenant, and the crew, the team that they had on their side, kind of, working with us. Landry French just really stepped up, and that team was incredible. And then we had a great architecture team out of Boston. So everyone was really meshed really well. We got to March and we were ahead of schedule. But it was just constant daily calls and trying to, you're trying to like address what you can. There's stuff you can't control, but you're trying to think of what you can adjust for anything that you can't control, right? So we knew that at some point, someone's going to come down positive and be sick in the building, and so we actually had over the course of about a month, I think 3 different subcontractors had a worker that tested positive. None of them were working together, and it's such a big building.
Yeah.
But we still took the precautionary step and shut the job site down for 4 days, and totally fogged it and cleaned it, and then instituted. And this was pretty early on. We instituted the mask policy and a single point of entry, hand sanitizing. Someone spraying sanitizer on you, and they were there all day, and a sink outside. So from then on, we had no positive cases, and I think it gave confidence to the subs because they were starting. Some of their crews were starting to be like, wait, that guy got sick, and I've got someone at home that I'm concerned about, and I don't want to go in. So we were having actually shortages. And after we did that, we accelerated. So we were ahead. We lost about a month, and we picked it back up.
So since you joined Northland, you've done about 85 million, right, in commercial real estate development. Do you have a favorite project? We talked a little bit about the Baxter Library, the VIA building. But.
Yeah, I kind of felt like Harvey was everything we've learned. We don't, nothing goes perfectly, right? We make mistakes, and our team, we have a small team, and I think we're a really good, Northland's a really good team, and we allow people to make mistakes and have authority to make decisions and do things, and and we learn from them, right? So so there's a lot of debriefing that goes on after a project, and how can we do that better, and how can we, how do we communicate with contractors better, and how we, just so that not to shift risk from us to them, but to help them do their jobs more effectively and help the so kind of be more of a facilitator of trying to get flow of communication and information, so I think like in one sense, Harvey is like the pinnacle of all of what we've been working for. Sanford is one, it's one that economically is, doesn't really make a lot of money. But it's a $12 million, so it's a mill rehab, 66,000 square feet, with blown out windows, and the previous owner was dismantling it for scrap. And we put, I think it was 12 and a half. I think it ended up being 12 and a half million. It appraised for 2.5 at the time. So it's like, how do you make sense of that? And so that was, I think we have like 8 different entities in our org chart, and and then a C corp. It was just, it just looks, it's very complex, and I love that. And and we had great partners. So we had federal historic credits, a group out of New Orleans that is a small fund that purchases for Chevron. So Chevron bought those. CEI bought the state credits. DECD came through with over $4 million in grant money.
Wow.
Through the neighborhood stabilization program. So that it's 36 apartments and 22,000 square feet of commercial. The apartments, all but 11 of them have income restrictions related to that grant money. We had Riverfront Community Bond Grant, which was a voter initiative that was passed in 2010, I think. We had DEP. It was a brownfield site, so we had grant money and loan funds through Southern Maine Regional Planning. That's their name at the time. TIF, Bangor debt. Bangor. One of the Mike O'Reilly told me, one of the folks at Bangor, when we toured him through, said, Mike said, what'd you think? What'd you think of the project? He's like, it looks like Dunkirk after the bombing. This is before we started. Pre-renovation. Right. And so, but like Mike had the confidence that we were going to be able to do, and they were our partner on the Baxter Library too. So it was kind of like, hey, we're going to do Baxter, but 3 times as big, and in a town that no one's done anything like this before. So they had the confidence, and I mean, it took forever. It was 7 years from when it went under contract to when we finished construction. But again, the city of Sanford was patient and was always trying to work creatively together. We have, one thing that's interesting is we've learned from this that, the commercial space on the first floor has been the biggest challenge, as well as the HVAC system, because it's, 18-foot ceilings, giant windows that are National Park Service windows, so they're double pane. And it's just a heat sink.
Like a brick building.
Brick building that we didn't insulate. The wall. I mean, the walls are about that much, and the glass is that much. So it wasn't. I don't know if that would have made our different, much of a difference. But in retrospect, it's a lot harder to heat and cool that building. So that's been a learning experience for us. But the commercial space, I think a lot of towns look at zoning and they think like, let's not do residential on the first floor because we want a vibrant, retail commercials, right? But there's got to be the demand for it, and I think as we've learned, and we've actually worked with the city over the last year to kind of adjust the zoning for the mill yard, and I think we're going to convert half of it to housing, because we have a 60-person wait list for the upstairs. I mean, the upstairs is always full.
So that's where the need really is in the community. Yeah.
And and we had a restaurant for a time. They didn't. They left, and other restaurants have looked at it and they're like, "This is great space. It's on the river. It's really cool, but we need more people here." And and in the mill yard, we're the only one that's been redeveloped. So
right. You don't have enough of a population there to.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, going back to Manchester when I was there, right? It wasn't. You didn't put the restaurant first.
Right.
It was
Bringing
UNH and Dean came in and they start populating it, and then there's the demand for the lunches and dinners and things like that. Yeah. So
that's an interesting capital stack scenario, though.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, it's funny. Like people would, I did a couple of presentations of like, how'd you do it? I'm like, I'll tell you how I did it, but it's never going to work for anyone else because there was like this one-time grant money that was a savior for the project. Right. So.
Well, you've done an awful lot of stuff over your time there. When I think of Northland, I think of the Century Tire site that's now Century Plaza on Marginal Way, where you've got a Chipotle and a T-Mobile and Orange Theory Fitness, among others.
Yep.
The Elks Lodge project on Outer Congress Street, the Journal Square in Augusta.
Yep.
So I guess when you see opportunities like this come your way and you go visit a site for the first time, Where do you get the vision that ends up turning into a reality, or do you just have a sense that this could be something and start?
It's a good question. That's one strength that Rex brings to our partnership, among many. But one thing that he's really good at, so he started in real estate. He was a national ski jumping coach for years. Okay. So he traveled the world, and he was a U.S. Olympic coach in ski jumping, and that was his life. And then he transitioned out of that and got into real estate. He and his brother started a small construction development company in Vermont. And he then transitioned into in the late '80s, when the banks were had these large REO portfolios from taking properties back. He started managing the REO portfolios for some of the bigger banks in Vermont. Mm-hmm. So he saw, he would go to a farm that they had taken, and he'd have to milk cows, and then he'd go to a retail building. And he saw all these different types of assets, and he saw what went wrong and why people lost them. So he kind of has as a baseline, kind of fundamental knowledge of what he remembers why things don't work out. But he also has a good gut of this is worth it. This is worth moving forward on. The vision thing that I think we both kind of come up with, but for me, I process slowly. Mm-hmm. So when I was in college and I would read philosophy, I literally would go. There was a big field at the top of the hill at Colgate, and I would lay there and listen to music and look up at the stars if it was at night, or I would just kind of sit under a tree and not think about it and kind of let it process in my brain, and then something would kind of come to me, right? And so it's not too dissimilar. I will go to a site and I'm like, this is cool. I don't know why. I don't know, right? I'm not, and part of it's because we do so many different things, and we work with different types of tenants and companies, that it's not totally clear of who should be here. And I knew Baxter was cool, but I had no idea it was as cool as it was with Via. Right. That turned it to 11. So one of the things we look at is, we're always looking for, we have a plan A, and then it's B, C, D, E, and F. What are we going to pivot if it A doesn't work or doesn't go the way we want? And and having several phases is attractive to us. Make phase one kind of work, and phase one, pays our investors a good return, gets our debt service coverage to a point where we can sleep at night, and then phase 2 and 3 are where we make money. So those are good.
So when you look at your real estate portfolio, or what you're doing for development, what does keep you up at night generally?
I think it's the health of our tenants. So. I didn't sleep much in March, and we tried to be proactive, reaching out to them. It got difficult because I think every tenant, their first thing they did, was call your landlord and ask for no rent. And we have, we can't just do that for everyone as much as we might want to. The banks were great. So I guess our first discussion was with the banks, and we're really lucky to have good local lenders for the most part. I think they're all local, and everyone was great. They were all receptive. And so once we had those discussions, renegotiated and did some allonges or loan modifications, we then went to our tenants and said, hey, we've been able to do this. We'd like to offer, this savings, but we'd like to, we want to make sure we're giving it to those who need it the most. So if you're, selling more burritos than you thought, let's try to make sure, let's all be in this together and make sure that the other tenants who might need it more, because, they're all, I think it's, if you're in a multi-tenanted building, you want to survive, but you also want your neighbors to be there, to be the deli that you go to for lunch. Sure. And, that's the thing that worries me the most, and the people that are affected by that, and I think from the physical nature of buildings, I think we do, that doesn't.
All right there. It's interesting that the way that COVID has impacted different businesses. As a landlord, you want to be as diversified as possible, but this particular pandemic and downturn, whether you're in a retail, office, industrial really might be the only market that has seen continued strength, but residential, everything else has kind of taken a hit at some level, so it's been a little bit.
We have a data center building, and that one's actually done okay too.
Has it?
So but there's no one in it.
Right. Right.
I think we're lucky. We just don't have a lot of restaurants and bars. I mean, I think that's those would be the hardest ones and the ones I'd want to help the most. Our food tenants have generally been able to do curbside pickup and things like that and do outdoor dining.
Yeah. So some of your projects, like the Stanford Mill and Century Plaza, you have redeveloped and held on to, but there are some that you've sold, and you mentioned Baxter Library, but what is it that drives you to sell an asset?
In general, I'm really good at acquiring and not good at disposing things, like my shoes and my cars, like talk to my wife. But when we're really never, so when we raise equity with our investors, it's never a 5-year or 7-year hold. We pro forma it as a 10-year hold, but there's never a date certain that we're going to get out.
No exit plan.
No exit plan. And probably it hurts us because we're then more reliant on cash flow returns. So we're not looking at appreciation and a big sale to get out. To us, that's uncontrollable, right? So is the cap rate going to be 6 or 10 or 8 or how do I, right? It's just a guess. So going into it, we usually don't have the plan to sell. When we do build to suits or renovate to suit, we often will agree to an option to purchase for the tenant. So Mecca has purchased a building that we did the Oak Leaf in, which was dorms. They bought that, and Via was similarly through that through an agreement with them. And that feels good for us because it kind of gives us a time where we know to our investors, all right, we've got 5 or 7 or 10 years, and here is an out, right? And there's a whether it's a pre-negotiated price or a formula. Others that we've sold, I think we look at where we can add value, and if we have added all the value we can add, at that point it's probably time to sell. And not for a passion reason or anything, but just there's nothing else to do. We've maximized the tenant rent and the square footage.
Yeah.
And in Journal Square, there was a family that I knew kind of a little bit, and it felt really good to sell to them. It wasn't something that we put on the market, so I think it's often.
Yeah, they had an exchange need, and
and the situation there, I think worked for both of us.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about the downturn that we're in right now that was brought on mostly by this pandemic. What do you think some of the long-term impacts of this downturn will be in commercial real estate?
Part of me thinks like if we're 6 months from now, and we feel like we can go back to work and we can go back to do things, will there be a rush of people to take to get back to go to the gyms that they haven't gone to and things like that? There are going to be less options for restaurants and bars and gyms, and right, unfortunately. But the work at home thing for me is the tough one to totally understand. I have a lot of my good friends in the New York area. They have a very different paradigm than we do, right? They have to take a train or a bus in from New Jersey or Connecticut or whatever. And so to not have an hour commute or an hour and a half commute, and they can work at home and not go into a city and deal with all that, they're like, I'm never going back again.
Sure.
Everyone I know here, while it's nice and to be working from home in certain respects, they're also missing the office. So, I feel like there's going to be several years of kind of this like adjusting on that side where people will need to have more space, so the office space will stay the same, and they'll adjust. After the next lease rolls, they may downsize. Downsize. I mean, our team find it very beneficial to be in the office together. We have a large outdoor space that we can utilize. So throughout the summer, we've been able to socially distance, but kind of all be together to brainstorm. So it'd be hard. I think it'll be difficult to start adding new team members to companies when you're never seeing them. But I also might just be like too old to.
So old school.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know the retail side of it. I think is going to be more affected, just in terms of like the buying things online, being, kind of conditioned to do that for a year and not go to your local store.
Yep.
I think the big box stuff is going to convert to distribution. I think that's where, the large Sears, Kmart's, things like that are going to start being distribution centers.
I do think you're right that the lack of the public transportation, while some people see it as a downside of Portland, in some ways it's kind of helped keep our office market as occupied as it is.
Yeah.
People can drive their own cars into work. I think it makes a big difference. So based on your experience as a developer, and you've done a lot of work directly with municipalities, is there anything that you feel like across the board they can implement or things that they could do better to create more growth in the market?
Look at it as there's two challenges at a municipality. One is the friction of the bureaucracy, depending on where you are, in terms of getting a building permit reviewed by everyone that needs to review it and commented on and back to you, and then getting a inspection scheduled and a certificate of occupancy, right? And so that stuff, I think, should be a focus of municipalities to try to streamline that process. So, it shouldn't take 3 months for a 1,500 square foot fit out.
Permit, yeah.
Yeah, building permit, right? So I think, and likewise, often, we've learned this to change this, but often leases will start at a CO. And we've had difficulty in some occupancies to actually get the CO, and so we're giving free rent after we're done work, and it's just like, this shouldn't be this hard, right? So that impacts how we try to look at the next deal in that municipality. So that's one thing. And I think that's kind of like, just make sure that that's predictable and streamlined. The public comment input from an approval process, that's more difficult for a municipality to, I think, affect. I think it's important for voices to be heard. It's frustrating as a developer sometimes to sit through that, but I think it's important, and that should be that way. Now, sometimes there's there's not enough leadership to kind of steer through that, but. Yeah, but I think that's an important, and it's a consideration that we have when we look at a project. So we learned at the Elks Club, so that required a zone change, and it was just a map amendment. So it wasn't a new zone; it was just moving the map line. And I think it was we had 18 meetings with our planning board and council and meetings with Stroudwater in the neighborhood, and they were valid concerns. For the most part, right? And I think we have a much better project today than we would have without all their input. So I, wholeheartedly believe that, and I'm glad that we had it was tough at the time. Then when we look at anything, we're like, wait, this needs a zone change? I don't know about that.
Can we go through this again?
Yeah. So it affects our decision making on new projects. But when we worked with so many different municipalities, there are some that have they just don't have the volume of projects coming in the door, so that that their staff can turn things around more quickly. Yeah. They're a little bit more nimble, and that's just a function of, I think, workload. And then you have the larger ones where there's a little just more friction and slowness to everything, and that matters.
Yeah, it's funny. 18 meetings in order to get approval before you can even get a shovel in the ground, right, on a project. That requires a ridiculous amount of patience.
Yes.
But I happen to know you're a bit of an adrenaline junkie, right? Sort of a speed demon. You're a former rally car racer.
Yep.
Maybe someday will be again.
Yeah,
but,
maybe.
So how do you square that you're kind of like move really fast in certain areas of your life, but in other ways you got to be really slow and really patient?
It's a good question. It's funny, the adrenaline thing is one thing that Rex and I kind of related to because of his ski jumping.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about, that, and I think it's not dissimilar. So, so I was a co-driver in a rally car for 6 or 7 years, and I'm sitting next to my friend Mike, who was the driver. We only raced together, and we could be going 90 miles an hour through the woods, and I'm calling notes. Sometimes we've caught someone and it's so dusty that he can't see, and he's totally trusting the note I call, which is the turn ahead of what we're in. So he's already adjusted for a right, at 60 miles an hour, taking a 90-degree right-hand turn, sliding through it, and I'm calling now. There's a jump into a left 2 down and the car's just moving. We can't see it, and the reason that works, and the reason why it's safe to do, which it's arguably not.
Doesn't sound safe,
but I had full confidence in him, and he did with me, is because of the preparation, right? And so with Rex, trying to understand how someone could stand at the top of a ski hill and jump, it's baby steps. Like, you don't start jumping off of a ski flying hill, but it's also the understanding, the preparation, the repetition, the rigor that goes into that, and understanding the risks. And anyone who stands at the top of the ski hill and isn't scared shouldn't be there. Right. And anyone who sits in my seat in the rally car, because I'm not driving, I'm telling the driver what to do. If you have any question that he's not going to do what I say when I shouldn't be there. And I kind of, so that's just in terms of like how I can kind of rationalize the adrenaline. And likewise with real estate, like if I haven't modeled it and I think fully understand and contemplated like anything I think could be a risk and a possibility, I shouldn't do it.
Right.
Now, I love the adrenaline side of it, but it's also like the preparation and contemplation and rigor of like digging into that. So with rally car driving, there's like this, it'd be a race is like 5 days. Of that, 2 days is actually racing. So like 3 days is the prep work and the doing the notes and driving together. And then when you do the racing, you might have like 10 minutes of flat out racing where your heart's at 170 beats per minute and it's just crazy. And then you might drive an hour and a half to the next stage. And you get to the next stage, you have to arrive there on your minute, and you sit there, and then someone's rolled, and then you wait, and then they say, all right, time to go, and then you got to go, right? So it's the joke is it's hurry up and wait. Yeah. Like it's this constant managing of energy and adrenaline, and knowing when to be able to ramp it up and when to calm down. So
yeah, I guess real estate development's kind of like that, right?
Yeah. Because if you just want the adrenaline all the time in development, you'd be doing really bad deals.
Right.
So
That's
you got to
true.
be patient.
So who were your biggest influences growing up?
So my mom and dad were. I didn't think it at the time, but looking back on it, my mom was president of United Way in Manchester. And I remember her work, leaving at 7 and getting home at 6:30 or 7. So, like looking back, she was like this, in charge, working really hard. My dad started his own consulting company, so he was out of the house, and so and he would work at night so he could be with us after we got home from school, and so I kind of am influenced by his lifestyle in that way. I had when I was probably like 14 or 15, there was a family friend, a guy named Jack Ebge, and he was a really successful or prominent doctor in Boston, an oncologist. And I remember telling him, I'm like, Jack, I'm going to be a doctor. And he's like, why? Do you like medicine? Like, do you want to help people? I was like, oh, yeah, I kind of want to help people. And he's like, no. Like, don't, no. Like, I'm like, they seem to make good money. And he's like, no, not a reason to do it.
Not a reason to choose a career.
Yeah, he's like, don't do that. Like, this is... if you don't have going back to the passion, he's like, if you don't have passion and this isn't what you absolutely want to do, don't do it. Find something that you want to do that. So that was very formative for me. And then Joe Simone at Tishman, he took such an interest, and he was such a good mentor. He would say, at the time it felt scary, but it would be like, you better be in work before I get here, and at the end of the day, at 7 o'clock, I'm going to buzz you, and I want you to come into my office, and I want you to have a list of questions. I'm like, well, what if I don't need any questions? He's like, make them up. Like, come in and ask me questions. I want you to ask me you're not going to understand this universe of real estate unless you ask me questions. And so sometimes I just had to make them up, but it was really cool and amazing that he took that interest and took the time to do that with me. And I try to do that when we hire anyone, there's a lot of young people that come to us and want to get into this work. And
mentorship is really key.
Yeah, I wouldn't be here without it. So.
Yeah. So Josh, thank you so much for being our guest today at the Boulos Beat. It was
Thanks
really
for
nice
having
to have
me.
you here.
This was fun.
Thank you. If you'd like to learn more about the Boulos Company, please be sure to visit us at boulos.com. You can find us on the Boulos Company at Facebook and LinkedIn, and the Boulos Co. on Instagram and Twitter. And lastly, if you want to know the secret to owning real estate, it's pretty simple. Greg Boulos would say, just outlive your debt, but I think you should probably also hire a really good real estate broker.